Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Manpreet Singh, President, Indian Chamber of International Business, and also today's coordinator for a lovely interaction on our economy with Dr. Sukanya Iyer and Dr. Shamika Raviji. Welcome, both of you. It's a pleasure to have both of you with us today. I hand it over to you, Dr. Sukanya, for today's proceedings.
Thank you, Manpreet. Good evening, Dr. Shamika. It's wonderful to have you here in our series called Ek Soch as part of our Intellectual Cell initiative. And I know you as a great economist, not only a great economist, a vocal economist who voices out the right perspective. Welcome to our show. Dr. Shamika Ravi, I have to give words fail me sometimes. How much ever we say about her, but I have to do the duty. So I'll give a brief introduction about her. She's a mother, an economist, a non-resident senior fellow of the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution, Washington, D.C. Former Director of Research at Brookings India. Above all, I would like to say that she has led the development economics vertical, concentrated on development economics, financial inclusion, health, gender inequality, and urbanization. Also, she's a visiting professor at ISB. She was the member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister of India, the present establishment. Her research work is featured and cited in various journals, newspapers, and magazines. To name them few, BBC, The Guardian, The Financial Times, and other leading regional news magazines of India. Shamika ji, we welcome you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
I would like to hear from your side 2 words, you can give your insights.
Sure. As a way of introduction and more as a motivation, I would say, I think it's a new country. Though we are 70-year-old, but there is a considerable degree of change and churn that is happening in the economy. We are a young country if you consider the fact that the median age is pretty low. We might be one of the youngest countries, and especially if you look at the overall size of the population, then I think we have we've had a paradigm shift in the way we are approaching our lives. Economy is a very central part of that because economy fundamentally drives a lot of our decisions. It drives our foreign policy, it drives national security concerns. But I think foremost, growth and economy is really about an individual and ordinary citizen's quality of living. From that perspective, my research basically tries to shed light into what are the current cracks in terms of where are we falling short and what more can be done. But much more from a micro perspective, meaning I look at household level data, I look at firm level data, I look at industry level data. So it's much more microscopic in terms of how I study the economy. Because one of my great teachers, William Baumol, who really said, he was a pioneer in many areas of research, and particularly growth. He did repeatedly tell me that, growth, Shamika, is really a micro concept. It happens in the firm. It happens at a household level. If we study it as a macro phenomenon, we miss out on a lot of the underlying processes. And therefore, it is important to have that microscopic view. And frankly, that is my motivation. Whether I study health, I study urbanization, gender, economic growth, but that's the perspective I come in with.
Wonderful insight. Thank you for those insights. From there, I take on. According to you, Shamika ji, what are the 3 most important policies, according to you, that can be in place to achieve the so-called, the magical figure of $5 trillion economy?
That's a great question, Sukanya ji, because it's playing at the back of, I think, everyone's minds. More because I think it tells you how aspirational India is right now, how we all fundamentally believe in the potential of this country. Now, by when we achieve it, and whether we are going to try and target a certain quality of living, because increasingly you will hear the Prime Minister in particular talk about livability, quality of living, and that's the way we have to approach economic development also. So that one figure really denotes, it's a culmination or a simple way of putting what these complex aspirations are. You know, frankly, we have to look at it from the existing gaps perspective. We are a large country, and fundamentally growth happens on the back of human capital. It's people of the country that grow a country. So human capital from education, health, basic value of life, gender is definitely one of them. And you know, despite many decades of policies, India still remains the only emerging market which has not made the necessary investment into health and education.
Correct.
And in fact, that is the way you have to also see why Ayushman Bharat has been this big step. And it is a step towards a larger goal, but why it is important to take that step towards universal health coverage. So Ayushman Bharat becomes that important step, but a lot more needs to be done. And then why a new education, a national education policy was required to fundamentally shake up the education space, because our youth require the kind of training and skills which, you know, modern day living mandates. So the, you know, important emphasis on human capital, particularly education and health, have been lacking. And I think those are the areas, and we remain the only country which has not made those prerequisite investment before moving on an exponential path.
Correct.
Every other country, China, South Korea, every other country, Vietnam, Thailand, these are all emerging markets which have made these investments. So for us now, this remains, I think, the current highest priority. And of course, at the back of it, there is infrastructure which is improving in many ways. India today is a transformed country. Even if you compare it from the last 25 years, we have seen how things around us. And I think infrastructure is the most visible form of that change. So there are many things happening, and I think the focus on human capital is that very key policy priority that we are trying to bring about in terms of economic development.
So that's the biggest takeaway, human capital.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a point to do. Fine. On that, I would like to also move your thoughts towards exports. Exports, you know, they are the most important source of forex for our country, for any country for that matter, for which also empowers MSMEs and also generates to larger extent employment. How does, or rather, what does the government need to do to support exports, according to you?
So the fact of the matter is that exports are one component in the larger space of, let's say, private investment. If we look at the private economy, which, private investment in India has not picked up over the last 7.5, 8 years.
Correct.
That is a bigger, so export becomes one sector or a narrower sector in that overall phenomenon of private investment.
Yeah.
See, the role of the government is one of a facilitator. Government provides public goods. And if you recall, this is a repeated message which the Prime Minister constantly, you will hear this in every election. This was particularly a mantra we followed in the 2014 wave, where the government's business is to stay out of business.
Yeah.
It means strengthen institutions, strengthen public goods, strengthen regulatory framework. But all of that is really to improve an architecture which makes private investment and private enterprise more productive and growth oriented. That's the overarching belief. Now, this is where export fits in. That for exports to grow, we also have to, we are talking about a global economy where we have to compete.
Yeah.
Now, increasingly, the cost advantages that China has enjoyed, and also because, because it's not simple cost advantages, it is also the scale advantages that China has enjoyed. But also, I think very actively, unlike every other country, they have also followed concerted policies which have protected, manipulated even currencies and manipulated let's say the WTO. If you look at the number of disputes which are happening, the maximum number of disputes at the WTO are really pertaining to China. Now, that gives you a sense of what is the role of the state in a major competitor, which is China. And how does our private enterprise, whose exports we are interested in seeing, compete against that reality? So today, when we say that businesses are moving out of China because of, let's say, the US-China trade, and there is a realignment after COVID, many countries are looking to shift their, let's say, the logistics, the supply chain away from China. We want to be that preferred venue. We want to be the destination for that relocation. All of that really goes into the concept of attracting foreign investment, right? Exports is one of them, but I'm talking about the larger global tectonic shifts that are happening, and why India, while sitting at the heart of it, we have to pull the right levers, but at the same time not be protectionist.
Correct.
And I think that is the big confusion which needs to be constantly, repeatedly dispelled.
Correct.
Because Atmanirbharta is not the growth model that we had in the first 50 years of independence, which is that whatever the intention might have been in the initial years, very quickly, the economy got captured through the license permit Raj. And it became, in trade theory, there is a concept of infant industry. There's an argument for trade protection, that the industries are infants, so give them the required protection, so that when they grow, they become, capable of competing in the global market. Now, as a mother, I know this very well. And I appreciate this as an economist, that infant industry argument sounds right theoretically, but the biggest problem with infants and protecting them is the weaning off. They don't want to let you go. So infants will not grow unless you sometimes throw them in the deep end and they have to compete. And that is the repeat message, Sukanya ji and Manpreet, that we need to constantly keep talking about. Atmanirbhar Bharat is about competitiveness.
Correct.
It's about improving productivity.
Correct. For
the global market and for the Indian market.
Correct.
It does not mean going back to a protectionist economy that we had.
That's what I also feel, and well spelled out the exact meaning of Atmanirbharta, and because some way it has gone in a different direction, Atmanirbharta, by many other economists, and you spelled it out and put it in right perspective, that Atmanirbharta doesn't mean leading towards protectionism, but openness, and also most importantly, Atmachintan, localization of resources. That's what I feel. On that, I will also ask you, there are some, like debt manufacturing assets spread throughout the country, resulting from 70s and 80s, where the country became a manufacturing powerhouse. But they're also affected by litigations, NPAs, disputes, etc. According to you, Shamika ji, what can be done to monetize them and put these assets to productive usage? Your insights.
That's a great question, and this is something we've been talking about since 2012-13 onwards.
Yes.
Because we have a lot of good assets which are trapped in, let's say, bad firms or under bad management. Now, part of the the IBC, Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, the idea around developing an entire industry around asset restructuring was this, that we should be able to rescue good assets from bad firms and find them the market values so that the loss is minimized. And you can move on. It can be redeployed elsewhere.
Correct.
And frankly, we saw a successful case of that happen even with, let's say, the Satyam case.
Yeah.
Right? Unfortunately, you see, that requires a very strong regulatory capacity. I think that is number one. Number two, it requires very strong judicial capacity, which means, and by strong, I mean it has to be fast moving also.
Yeah.
Now, this is where it's important to recognize that, when we say NPA, we are thinking, rich guys have basically taken big amounts of loans and now they've run away. That is a caricature. There are some cases like that, but that's not majority of our problem.
Correct.
A lot of it, you have to appreciate that, it has also been an amalgamation of various factors, and the judiciary is a very large part of it. For instance, India carried out a lot of the energy sector reforms under Prime Minister Vajpayee. In fact, NDA-1 brought about fundamental reforms in terms of liberalizing and reforming the economy. So I think NDA-1 was far more important in terms of, if you look at India's modern economic growth, than the 91. 91 was back against the wall, bringing about changes as far as dismantling some of the early. But active investment of the government into sectors, liberalizing many parts of the economy, and energy was a very large part of it. Now, imagine after the energy sector reforms, so from 93, 94, a lot of these things started to happen. After 93, now imagine all the way up to 2007-8, because India moved from an energy deficient to an energy surplus economy. This is a growing economy, so the demand for energy is also rising. And we started to do very good, because of the energy sector reforms, we became surplus, efficiency increased. The banks also started lending to the energy sector. So a lot of the banks, particularly the public sector banks, their exposure to the energy sector also increased a lot. And then suddenly, of course, you had the Supreme Court of India come down and basically, abolish the coal block allocations were termed illegal, reversing 18 years of reality. Now, this is where I like to say that, we need a lot of economic education,
Yes.
and even within the judiciary.
Correct.
Right? It is not just administration on the executive part of the government,
Correct.
of the state, but I think judiciary also has to be educated. Of course, the judiciary's role is to give you growth. I mean, judiciary is trying to do the right thing.
Right.
I think this is where judgments can be, you have right judgments and then you have intelligent judgments. So to deny the reality of what had happened over the past 15, 16 years was therefore very, very damaging. Now, after that coal block allocation was annulled, you can imagine overnight NPAs shot up in the public sector banks. Now, whose fault is it?
Yes.
Right? It is not just a case that these were very rich businessmen who took up and then they didn't know how to run the business. There was some element of that. But there was also, sort of coming together of some very unfortunate, and then of course retrospective taxation,
Correct.
many sort of, I think, bad laws, which sort of culminated into lowering of this faith in the Indian economy as far as investors were concerned.
Yeah.
That is the great sort of the expectation from the right government, right? And the right government from an economic sense, that it has to be about reforming, about giving more individual rights. I think it is right. Economic policies are not about only markets.
Correct.
In fact, we know very well that markets fail, particularly in sectors that I am passionate about, health, education. Markets fail all the time.
Yes.
There's a very big role of the government. Public sector is likely to remain a key player in India's economy for many, many decades. Well-functioning market economies need well-functioning states with capacity to regulate. And I think the first 5 years of Prime Minister Modi were meant to strengthen that administrative capacity for a more efficient welfare state. That's why you had the JAM, the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile infrastructure getting strengthened. Swachh Bharat has been, I think people don't talk about these things.
Yes.
Like I said, growth lies in these, these aspects of day-to-day life. And this is what we call the real economy.
Yes.
Where human capital is enhanced because your infant mortality is reduced, quality of life is improved. So first 5 years were about making the government apparatus more efficient. I think these 5 years will be about fundamentally growth enhancing policies, which we have not seen since Vajpayee era. In fact, the UPA growth rode on the investments and reforms of NDA-1. They brought about several important reforms like RTI, NREGA. They are very, very important, but they are more from a welfare state perspective. Aadhaar, very, very important. But, eventually making Aadhaar universal was also something that fell upon the responsibility of this administration. So I think it's only now with agriculture reforms, labor reforms. These are some very big reforms. Unfortunately, it is happening in the middle of a pandemic. When the impact is not going to be seen sort of urgently, it will happen over time. But theoretically, these are the kind of reforms we have been trying to push since the 80s, Sukanya ji. These are not. So the politics you are seeing around it is unfortunate, but that is the reality of a democracy. But economically, I think honest economists would agree that these are very welcome, long overdue growth enhancing reforms.
I think you put it straight, tabled it right, and put the facts straight across. I think a democracy is all about dissent, debate, and discussion. That's always there, no doubt about it. So the follow the rule book follows. I think 2014 to 2019, I think the policies were late. And from 2019, the policies had to take off. But unfortunately, we are caught in the grip of pandemic. But see, even during the pandemic, I think it has created a lot of newer opportunities to grow, to mushroom, as we say, towards Atmanirbharta. And before I hand it over to Manpreet, my last question will be, how will be India, according to you, will be OnePlus destination for factory of the world?
We have to be the factory of the world, Sukanya ji. This is where I think we derive our optimism from, because we cannot not be the factory to the world.
Yeah.
Number one, there is a false narrative when people say India has missed manufacturing bus.
Yes.
The reality of growth is that there are buses coming. You just have to get onto it. We cannot be an anomaly to what is a growth model we have seen historically, which is countries move from agriculture to manufacturing to services. But given the nature of services and the IT and IT-backed growth, we did see the services becoming engine of growth. But it is not possible to absorb such a large labor force into services. Whether, there is services also has an entire spectrum of skills required. So manufacturing is something we have to think of strategically from long-term perspective. That look, global growth, and this is where the export-oriented growth, etc., of East Asian countries, etc. This is where when we compare ourselves, particularly Vietnam, Bangladesh now, it's not just growth of OECD countries. These nations have grown on the back of manufacturing exports to the OECD rich, affluent part of the world. But the global economy is growing. The demand for simple and complex manufacturing products will increase in Africa, Latin America, rest of Asia. The demand for shirts, clothes, furniture, paper, shoes, leather. Think of the entire spectrum of day-to-day consumption, where that demand is only going to keep rising. So we cannot say that the bus has been missed. No. In fact, we know that the Chinese, because of the one-child policy, the labor costs are now increasing. They are aging. In fact, the biggest fear in China now is that they will age before they become rich.
Correct.
Unlike in places like, let's say, the Scandinavians or the Japanese, who are rich, but they are very worried because they are very, growing old and they have a shrinking population. The Chinese is a problem of growing old before they become rich. Now we know that everybody is aging, but we are very young. The global economy demand will rise. So manufacturing, eventually we have to become the hub for a large part of that global demand.
Correct.
The idea is, how do we become globally competitive? And that's where you've seen corporate taxes come down.
Yes.
The ease of, why is every state government in India today competes over ease of doing business, ease of drawing investment. What is Yogi ji doing in Mumbai? Right? I mean, you will see Nitish Kumar do the same because states want to attract investment. They do realize that, labor needs to be absorbed outside of agriculture with the low and the semi skills, and they have to grow. Therefore, ease of doing business is very important. That's also why strategically the Skill India programs, etc., are so important across states.
Thank you so much, Shamika ji, for all your insights. I think you plucked my point of Yogi ji in Mumbai. To add to that, because many eyebrows are being raised, whether the film city will be moved or the Bollywood will be moved. So that is also causing a lot of furore. But having said that, there is no need for passport for us to move to any one state or the other. Everyone is free. This world's largest, greatest democracy, where we spell out that everyone of us can go and settle and we contribute. And I, being a Mumbaiker now fully, I contribute towards Mumbai's economy, being the financial capital of India. Over to you, Manpreet. On this note, you can take it further and you can continue your thought process with Shamika.
Thank you so much. I mean, I was really wondering, which point you both have missed out, and I am happy to say that none is actually missed out. So there's nothing really left for me to ask. But then, yes, I would like to really point out, Shamika ji, what you mentioned. We've been hearing since I think I was in college that bus or train किसी के लिए नहीं रुकती, एक जाती है तो दूसरी आती है. So I think that's what we really have to keep in mind. And that's something that should be the driving force for the industry, for the households, for the Atmanirbharta that we are all looking after. And it is all about Atmanirbharta 3.0 now. We've had the Swadeshi movement, we've had the nationalization movements, and now is the time to drive it to the common man to ensure that we take back our country to the top, to where it belongs, and how we are going to achieve that is onto us now. It is our responsibility. Thank you, both of you. It's been a pleasure having you with the lovely conversation that we saw today. Thank you, both of you. It's been a pleasure and honor.